Hey, 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 nurse bosses. If you are a post pandemic nurse and you are struggling with charging your worth, still suffering from burnout, and are considering the nurse entrepreneurship avenue, you do not want to miss this episode. So, on today's Nurse Boss Shift, we are really diving into this post pandemic nurse and what it looks like for our profession, but also what it looks like for those who are making the nurse shift. So Christal and I worked during the pandemic to some capacity. And so we're going to kind of explore the results of that working during the pandemic on our emotional, mental, physical health, and then how that kind of set us up for nurse entrepreneurship. We'll also talk about our desire and the urge to become entrepreneurs, how it increased dramatically post the pandemic than it was before. So we were both considering entrepreneurship and working towards being entrepreneurs prior to the pandemic, but it kind of gassed our urge to become entrepreneurs. And then we're going to also discuss the struggles that most of us have as nurses. It is also a struggle with us as nurses internally and externally because of, first of all, what society has placed on us as far as the definition and what a nurse looks like versus this new nurse that we're kind of creating based on our life experiences and as we kind of take one step at a time. So we are going to explore that and more in the Nurse Boss Shift.
Yes.
So is that the pre-frame?
Let's get into it.
Okay. So pretty much, so we're going to dive in today and talk about charging our worth. I think post-pandemic, that looks different. How we charge what we are deserving of. We're also going to dive into basically nurse burnout. You know, I've been a nurse for 14 years. Christal, you've been a nurse for how long?
12 years now.
12 years. And the burnout kind of got put on steroids after the pandemic. So we're going to explore that too. And then also we're going to talk about the rise of the nurse entrepreneur and what that looks like in this post-pandemic era. So Chris, first of all, let's kind of dive into the whole charging of our worth. Because I don't know, do you feel like it's changed since since the pandemic, or even our perception of it has changed since the pandemic? What do you think?
That's tough to say because there's different as far as bedside nursing or nursing, traditional nursing, and then the nurse entrepreneur. So as a nurse entrepreneur, I feel that we have had that mindset shift to know what our worth is and to charge for it. Nurses who are working their 3 shifts and nursing traditionally, I feel like pandemic, we knew our worth. We knew that we were worth more. So we were technically charging more for our worth. But now the pandemic has gone by and people are still making the same as they were before. And it's kind of gone back to normal. Even the travel nurse fees, they're not getting as big of contracts as they were before. And we just have to deal with it. So essentially, we're not still able to charge our worth at the hospital or at these institutions because we have to accept what they give us. So they needed us during the pandemic. They were willing to pay us whatever they needed to get us to work, to get people to fill those positions. But now that's gone away and it's like, okay, you guys are back to normal. So we can go about charging you the normal rates, which I don't think is fair, to be quite honest. But if you don't know any better, then you just have to accept that.
Yeah. And I just feel like, charging, we're saving lives. So I just feel like our worth just really bumped up like during the pandemic. It's like
Mm-hmm.
we're saving lives, but we're also sacrificing our own. And so
Yes.
when there's this disparity that exists, because we know if you're in like Florida or Mississippi or Alabama, your hourly rate is nothing like we get here in California. We're like
Mm-hmm.
almost double the average of those states. So I think
Right.
nationally nurses are starting to say, okay, this isn't fair, because in California, they take care of, first of all, we take care of less nurses, so our load is less. But
Less
also,
patient.
our patients are sick, their patients are sick.
Mm-hmm.
Why in the
Right.
world are they being paid $25 an hour and nurses here are being on average paid $55 an hour? So
Right.
I feel the climate shifting. What do you think just from that?
Yeah, and they try to say, well, it's the cost of living, et cetera, but it just seems that the pay disparity is so much um it's so much great, like the pay disparity is so wide that how do they even justify what they're paying
Mm-hmm.
these nurses
Mm-hmm.
for taking on even more patients, having even harder workload. I have a friend, that just reminds me, I have a friend, when you said risking our own lives, who caught COVID at work during the pandemic, and her whole vocal
Mm-hmm.
cord is gone. She talks like,
Mm.
yeah, so ah. That's how she talks, and they're trying to send
Oh,
her,
wow.
sweep it under the rug and just send her back to work. So it's just like the climate has to change, but it's up to nurses to fight for that, and to know our
Mhm.
worth, and to not accept what they are trying to hand us. So I think that as nurses, we
Yeah.
have a great responsibility as well to not accept what they're trying to do to us, and to stand up for ourselves
Mhm.
and come together to be able to get some sort of pay where it's equal all around, because the same patients that are
Yeah.
in Mississippi are the same patients in California. And yes, it costs
Mhm.
more to live here, but why should they be making like 1/3 of what we make here? And
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
I don't know if that has to do with legislation or the government, but yeah,
Yeah.
something needs to change. But I feel like it's us as nurses have to come together to make that change happen.
And I understand. I mean, it is business, and the reality is we could never be reimbursed for what we are giving in return. We know that, right? We
Yeah.
just want it to be fair. Like if
Right.
I mean, when I worked that travel assignment, I had and I
Mm.
always tell this story. I had more patients die in an 8-week assignment that I had than I had in, at the time I had been a nurse for 12 years, going on 13, than I had in a combined 13 years. I am
Mm.
not the same after
Right.
those
The post-traumatic
experiences.
stress that has gone on. There's
I
several
am
nurses
telling
who
you.
really are dealing with post-traumatic stress from seeing those things. They can never pay us for
Yes.
that.
They can never. So what we're asking for is not, you have to pay me for putting my life at risk, because you can't. Like you have to pay me for saving grandma or papa. You can't,
Right.
right? But it has to be commensurate of what we're doing. And if we have our medical doctors who are making 3, 4, 5 times what we are making,
Mhm.
and we're
Mhm.
very closely aligned with saving the patient, taking care of the
Yeah.
patient, there has to be some kind of balance. And I feel like in this post pandemic, nurses are realizing that there's a big push for
Mhm.
national staffing ratios. That's something that
Yes.
was flirted with when California kind of started 15 years ago with this, but now it's a huge, huge push. And I just think it's time. It's time for us to, really charge what we deserve and actually have a good experience without breaking our backs, and without, it's saying that's a part of the job, the abuse we experience
Mhm.
from patients, the abuse we experience from families, the list goes on and on. And I think
Yeah.
that since the pandemic, and during it and even after, a huge bright light has shined on us and kind of highlighted a lot of the things that we had swept up under the rug, and brought it to the forefront, for sure.
Yeah, it absolutely has. My thoughts go to what can we do to rectify this problem? Because I think that leads to what we were talking to. Well, I don't know if we've mentioned it yet, but how nurses are leaving bedside. So there's either two choices, to stay or to leave, but there has to be an in between. Like, how do us as nurses fight for what we deserve? Is it us coming together? Is it us, more strikes or walking out? Like, what does that look like for us to be able to be treated fair and get the compensation that we deserve for what we've been put through and what we are going to be put through in the future? Like, what does that look like? Getting those equal rights.
Yeah.
In nursing.
And so I think, charging your worth does not always have to equate to, like you said, diversifying, having multiple streams of income, thinking about those times when we may get sick, and we still are gonna have to pay bills and still have, responsibilities and obligations. So that's also, I feel like, kind of bundled in this movement of like this realization, and not to mention people who work way less and who have way less impact make way more than us, and we're not having it. And so the main thing is charging your worth could mean staying in the hospital setting and just being in a position where you find that joy and happiness, where you feel valued and appreciated in your role, and where you're able to truly take care of your patients. But it also could mean, considering other options and other streams of income in order to, have that additional value or leverage to be able to live, the life that you want, especially after pandemic. Because I feel like life has gotten shorter, and I'm not just saying it in literal terms. I mean, figuratively too. It's just, we've realized like it's really short.
Yeah, because
so
we
let's
had
talk about
no clue this pandemic.
go ahead.
I was just going to say, we had no clue that this pandemic was coming. And I'm sure there's the fear of what's next. Is there going to be another strain right? Is there going to be another strain that comes around? What's going to happen next time? So I think we've realized that, shit can hit the fan really fast, and we have to, be prepared for that. But also, what is that going to look like if this has another go round? How much more could we take of this pandemic and COVID and whatever next, monkeypox and whatever next virus is to come. So yeah.
Yeah. And then also, just to segue from, just them charging their worth, we can't talk about the pandemic without talking about burnout. Because I almost feel like burnout is synonymous with nursing. I feel like if somebody type in a burnout job, it should be a nurse in some scrubs and a stethoscope. Because we are burnt out. But can you tell, like, let's give me a story, Christal, of like a time when you like realized that burnout was real. Like, give me a story. Tell me a time in your nursing career where you were like, okay, this is what burnout feels like. Like, I know this is what I'm suffering from.
Yeah. So it was definitely around the time when I started my first business that I always talk about, working lots of overtime, preparing for a wedding, and it was a horrible flu season. That was in 2017. So it wasn't even COVID, but it was a horrible flu season. Our hospital, the hospital that I work at, it was normally a hospital that only took those who paid for insurance for that hospital. So the ER was used to only having only the people who paid for that insurance to go to that hospital. But there were laws that were changed, Obamacare, et cetera, where we had to start accepting everybody. So I don't think that the hospital was prepared for that. And that's when I started working there. So they didn't know how to handle these large crowds. Doctors still only took 2 patients per hour. That was written in their contract. So if there were 50 patients waiting and we had 5 doctors on, there only 10 patients were getting seen for that hour. So it was just horrible. Working triage, having to sit there and look at these patients who are halfway dead in the waiting room because nope, the doctor already saw their 2 patients per hour, and if it was a level 2, then they only got 1 patient that hour. So
Oh
um
my
the
goodness.
hospital was just not used to this overload, and especially when you have, it's a very nice hospital. So when you have people used to going to county, but now they can go to this um I don't want to say wealthy, but this hospital that had all kinds of resources, where do you think they were going to go? So the county hospital acuity went down. Our acuity was sky high. And that's what I was working in. I was just so burnt out working. But I had to work. I had to put in those shifts because I had no other streams of income, and I wanted this wedding and I wanted this honeymoon. So I had to work. And I remember just being extremely stressed out going to work. Counting down the hours, staring at the clock, didn't want to go in, extremely anxious having to go in.
Mm-hmm.
Also working nights, which was new to me. So it was a very difficult time. But I was just thinking of other ways that I could make money outside of those working conditions because I knew I could not survive like that. So that was just a
Yeah.
really trying time. I mean, it was 9-10 hour waits, and it was just a horrible time working, and that was pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
So when the
Yeah.
pandemic hit, it was just that on steroids. So I
Right.
knew that it was burnout because of the symptoms I was feeling, being very anxious,
Mm-hmm.
not wanting to go into work, just hating like nursing. Why did I get into this? um, but just trying to see the light at the end of the tunnel and just keep pushing through. And that's when I decided to go back to school because at the time I just wanted other options. And I
Right.
knew, and as being an ER nurse, it's kind of like, once you're an ER nurse, where else do you go? Because everything else seems kind of boring. You're used to the
Mm-hmm.
hustle and bustle. You're not going to go back to the floor. So it's like, where do you go? So the only out I saw at the time was getting my nurse practitioner license, which that
Yeah.
was like my way out. Okay, I can survive this
Mm-hmm.
burnout right now because I know I'm in school, and in a few years I'll have more options and I'll be able to do something else. So that was my burnout
Right.
experience. Then how about yours? What
Yeah.
was your
As
burnout
I'm
time?
listening to you share your burnout, I'm thinking, I know how burnout feel, but it's not a collective burnout. Like it's not like, there's a like I'm tired today, like I'm exhausted, I'm just
Mm-hmm.
over it. But then there's a I've been a nurse for I'm just the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I stopped working after 3 years full time, remember? So I was
Mm-hmm.
never like I didn't do that for 10 years straight and it was like, "Oh my god, I'm just done." Like this it was like I wasn't burnt out. I don't think it was burnout. I think it was more so I was tired of the like bureaucracy. I was miserable, right? It wasn't that I was burnt
Mm-hmm.
out. I did not like it. I knew I didn't want to work bedside. I did it, and then there was the bullying, there was the bureaucracy, there was like all the other things that made me just like
Mm-hmm.
over it, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't think because like when I hear people, say like hearing yours, it's like this is something that happened over time, you know what I'm saying? And they
Yeah.
just work us like dogs. But I
Yeah.
mine was early. So I don't think it was like the true burnout. It was just I never
Yeah.
wanted to go there anyway and I was just done and over it.
Yeah.
But when I started to realize that I knew I was giving up too much of my time doing
Mm-hmm.
what didn't matter more to me than anything, which was my family. I knew I had
Yeah.
to change. And it was like, I actually was working per diem at a healthcare organization that I actually liked. And I was working
Yeah.
bedside 4 days a month, but it was like the traffic and, just talking to the other nurses, just even at this place, which was a good place to work for bedside, it was still kind of a lot of the same stuff. And I just
Yeah.
wanted more. And
Mm-hmm.
so like, even though, but since the pandemic, my experience was really which kind of tipped me over was when this particular healthcare organization and we started doing vaccine. I mean, we started screening everybody for COVID during COVID. Like this is when California was
Mm-hmm.
shut down freeways was empty, by the way. It was amazing. Like
Yeah.
usually it takes me an hour and a half to get there, and it was taking me 20 minutes, dude. I was like in heaven.
Right.
So I was working, I think I had worked like 16 days straight, 8-hour shifts.
Wow.
And we were doing 8 hours. So it was like 7 to 3:30, something like that. But it was
Okay.
I had such a good feeling. Like it was like really purpose driven. It was like showing up, you know what we sign up for nursing to do. Like it was like, because they didn't have an idea of like nothing. We just knew that there was this virus that got into the healthcare system. And of course, healthcare providers and the healthcare team were the first to be exposed to it. So they were spreading it to everybody else. So they had to do a mass screening. And so to be a part of that, I felt so good. It was like, oh my God, like I get to finally be a nurse. Like I got a picture of me on the corner because I was standing outside screening the patients because they couldn't go in. So we screened them outside and then one by one go in. And I'm like, yeah, like, you know, I was so excited. And then the politics happened. And then the not enough N95s. Then you can't wear N95s. Then it got really thick really quick. And I knew it was time for me to step away. So that was the like, oh my gosh, like even at this organization that I like kind of put on a pedestal pretty much, the pay is amazing. Like, you know, it is the good place to work as far as health, the bedside, but they were doing some of the same things that I had like praised them for not doing when it came down to it. So it kind of shined a light for me like, this shit, when it comes down to it, we are going to be at the bottom of the totem pole a lot of times. And not only that, a lot of times we're the sacrificial lambs in a lot of cases. And so it really shined a light on that for me. And I just feel like, you know, I didn't like, other than that 8-week assignment, you know, we have nurses who have worked in this pandemic now for 2 years. And so, and some who actually graduated nursing school in the pandemic, poor babies. But I feel like, dude, every year is equivalent to 5 years, in my opinion. I always say that in this pandemic. So like the burnout, like it is so real. And when people don't understand the overall effects that it has had on us, this is the result. It's like people want to leave. 66% of the 2,500 nurses surveyed in a study by Incredible Health, 66% of them said they want to leave the bedside. 43% said they want to leave the profession as a whole. There's only 4.3 million nurses, and we are already short for 2022, and we were projected to be. But now you have all of these nurses that are suffering from burnout, you know, and they're ready to go. They're ready to go. And guess where they're going?
Where are they going? Entrepreneurship?
To entrepreneurship. Yeah. A lot of nurses are becoming entrepreneurs. So I say it's the rise of the nurse entrepreneur.
Yes.
I think a lot of people flirted with it. But after the pandemic, we got a lot of money from them travel assignments. And people are putting their money where their mouth is and investing in themselves and growing their businesses. Those who dare to.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
Right. I think that everybody should be doing that. If not in entrepreneurship, at least finding other investments, which I guess that's a part of entrepreneurship too, because you're taking your money and you're investing in different things and you're not depending on an employer to pay you. So in a sense, investing in other things is a form of entrepreneurship too. But I think that we should, especially as nurses, all the knowledge that we have, being critical thinkers, being emotionally intelligent, we should get into entrepreneurship, with the knowledge that nursing has allowed us to accumulate, because we should be our own bosses and we should be able to dictate going forward, because we've been put through so much hell in this pandemic, we should be able to
Mm-hmm.
dictate how much we're getting paid, spending time with family. I think those things
Mm-hmm.
have been prioritized through this pandemic, knowing how
Mm-hmm.
important family is and how life is so short and how we need to spend more time with our family. I think that the only avenue that nurses have is to, not the only avenue, but a major avenue that we have is to get into entrepreneurship after the hospital, because we want that freedom. I feel like nurses want
Yeah.
that freedom, we crave that freedom, especially working so hard during the pandemic and being turned down for a vacation, and hospitals were short. So, and we felt,
Mm-hmm.
because we got into nursing to help people, we felt it was our duty to show up to work, even though we didn't feel like it, even though we were risking our lives and risking our family life, because we don't know if we could bring COVID back home. All of those things, the only next best option I feel like for us is to get into entrepreneurship and doing stuff for
Mm-hmm.
ourselves and being our own boss, and just
Right.
having the life of freedom that we definitely deserve, being that we carried COVID on our backs, and saved
Right.
so many lives. At my hospital, it was, the doctors were tucked away in their offices seeing patients from a camera, and the nurses were the ones going in and taking care of it. And I too work for a really great organization, I will say. I aspired to be there. I thought I was going to be there until my retirement. But then I had my shift in which I was like, nope, that's not the life for
Yeah.
me. But yeah, I feel like nurses deserve that. And anyone who's flirting with the idea, really, my whole point is to get them to see that you are more than well equipped to become an entrepreneur, because as you said earlier, there's people with way less education, with way less talent and way less knowledge, who are making, or who are charging their worth. So why can't we as
Mm-hmm.
nurses do the same?
Yeah, exactly. And I
Yeah.
feel like,
How do you feel?
I think nurses are not, like you said, everybody is not for, it does not like maybe want to start a business. But I think we should start
Mhm.
reimagining even nurse entre. What if we just take ownership of our nursing license? Like, and
Yeah.
there's nurses out here now that are starting to get direct contracts with hospitals to work with them using their
Mhm.
nursing license. They have their own
Mhm.
insurance. They don't
Mhm.
have to, I mean, they don't have to worry about benefiting them, nothing. They're negotiating. Like, so
Yeah.
I would like, in my perfect world, if we could just reimagine what the nurse entrepreneur, like the nurse boss, like what does that look like? And even if you don't
Yeah.
want to start a business, do something, own your
Mhm.
license. We really
Yeah.
think, and it has been kind of interwoven into our experience during our education and what we have learned about nurses, that we go to school to get this license and basically we're working for, it's ours. It's
Mhm.
not their we pay for those loans. We the one who take
Right.
out those loans. We're the one who sit for the study for that test. We're the one who take the NCLEX. It's ours. And the minute
Yeah.
something goes wrong, they remind us that it's ours because we're in
Right.
jeopardy of losing it. So I just wish
Yeah.
that, you know, this rise of the nurse entrepreneur really changes what nursing kind of looks like, even at the bedside, even, as an employee role, like,
Mhm.
by us taking ownership of our license. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that we need to also research what all we can do for our license, because we depend, a lot of times we hear stories about nurses who are like, oh, well, they said I couldn't do that. Well, did you research it yourself? Like, we have to take, like you said, take ownership and research what we can do with our license. We don't have to have a travel, I was going to say travel agency, but a travel, what do they call it? A staffing agency. Like you were saying, we don't have to have a staffing agency to contract ourselves. We can go direct contract ourselves to these
Mm-hmm.
hospitals and provide these services.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to research what all we can do with our license and know what all our license entails and what we're allowed to do with it versus listening to other people, because they breed us that you get this license, you go work for the hospital. That's your only option.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now we should be smart enough to know that that is not our only option. And there's so much that we can do with this license that we have, versus just working bedside and just working at the hospital for somebody else.
Exactly. All right. So now we have, our listeners now. We have nurses who are still at the bedside. We have some nurses who are employees and maybe they're not at the bedside. Maybe they work at the clinic. Maybe they work at, another on Disney cruise, wherever they are. Right. So what do you think, and what would be your one piece of advice for the post-pandemic? And we're saying post-pandemic, but we know it's an endemic. Okay, so it's not really gone, it's an endemic now. We know that COVID is here, right? But like, what's one piece of advice that you would have for the post-pandemic nurse, considering what we were just talking about as far as them charging their worth, or the burnout, or even the rise of the nurse entrepreneur? What piece of advice would you have for them?
Yeah, I would definitely encourage nurses to sit and really think about what you want to do. If you're unhappy in your current job role, then, as we said, it might not always be entrepreneurship, but if you're unhappy where you are, then go somewhere else. Go to another unit, go to another hospital. I think nurses, we complain as if we don't have other options. And I do have to always consider those nurses who, because everybody can't be in California and LA where there's lots of hospitals. I know that there are those nurses who are in these small towns, who there might only be one hospital. But if you're unhappy at that one hospital, then look outside to what else you can do with your nursing license. Don't stay stuck somewhere because you feel it's your only option, because I promise you it's not, especially with the rise of telehealth and these virtual hospitals that we have where nurses are able to take care of patients right from their home. There are options for you as a nurse if you're unhappy where you are. So I would encourage nurses not to stay stuck being unhappy, and to research your options because you have them. You just have to take the first step and really commit that you are going to find a better way and you are going to create the life that you know that you want, because you don't have to stay stuck somewhere. We are all able to create whatever it is that we want to do. You just have to put one foot forward and do the research and really, find where you are happy at. I just want all nurses to get to that happy place. And it doesn't always have to be entrepreneurship, but it might be another unit, it might be another hospital, or it might be starting something of your own, or going completely opposite, following your passion. If you're a writer, get into that, explore that. If you're a singer, explore that. Don't stay unhappy, because that's not the type of life to live, being unhappy, because it's not only not good for you, it's not good for your family, and it's also not good for the patients you serve if you're unhappy and you're, the caretaker of a patient. They don't want an angry nurse. Nobody wants an angry nurse. So that's what I would encourage nurses. What would you encourage nurses who are struggling post-pandemic? What would you encourage them to do?
I really just want nurses to not let this be in vain. I mean, it really is something that we needed to go through. And just like I do in my business, and I always say, okay, what did this serve? What's the lesson I'm supposed to take away from this? And I really hope people are digging deep during this time. And I'm not trying to be all like, but it's really important, because this is not something we have experienced to forget and go back to business as usual. And so it is my hope that, we are really thinking about, all the things that has happened to us. And I mean, our individual and our collective experiences. So like you said, as people who have worked in rural hospitals, Lord knows what they've seen, without a lot of resources. There's those of us who may have worked in major metropolitan hospitals who also have seen a lot of things and traumas and things like that. Like, what are you going to do with it? Because if you don't do something, take it and package it and do something with it, the potential for it to happen again will increase for sure. Because these healthcare organizations are going to feel like we don't see it. Just like they've ignored a lot of the things and traumas that we've been through, you know, the abuse we suffer from patients. We're not protected at the bedside. We know that. And now it's also shined a light on the fact that we're not protected from our microorganism enemies as well. Like when it came down to it, doctors were in the N95s and we were in simple face masks. So like, I want that to be, you know, and the nurses who have sacrificed their own lives, who are no longer with us because they died from COVID. Like, don't make that in vain. That's my thing. So when we're talking about like the post-pandemic nurse, like I hope she comes back, and I say she, but we know there's men and women in nursing, but we know it's predominated by women, but I hope he or she comes back like with a super cape on, you know what I'm saying? Like, and we're not taking no nonsense. We're not taking no prisoners moving forward. You know, we are definitely going to stand in our positions of power and own our profession and not allow others outside to dictate what that looks like for us. And they're going to have to meet us where we are instead of us always adapting and changing to them. So that's something that I'm hopeful for when it comes to, you know, where they are, wherever they are. And I'm not like, again, I didn't say anything about entrepreneurship, but the shift can still happen. It can still happen from where they are if it starts in the mind and we really take that time to reflect. You know, I really do feel like that. All right. So we are going to go ahead and close today. I think this was definitely a powerful, powerful, powerful episode, and something that is not talked about enough. But if you guys like our episodes, you know, we need some more nurse bosses to listen to our episode and definitely potentially come on our episode if you have an amazing story, if you have already experienced the shift and you want to share it and you think those of our listeners could benefit from your story, we would love to hear from you.
So yes, if you enjoyed this episode, we would love for you to share it with your nurse besties and everybody else who is a post-pandemic nurse who needs to hear this. So please share this episode and also leave us a review and let us know how you liked it.
Yeah, and any questions also, you guys. If you have something you want us to discuss, make sure you give us that information too. Until next time, you guys. Bye.
Bye.